Hey, what took you so long? It's been a month since your last upload. Nothing really, I just wanted to make sure I gave this video enough time in the oven. Right, because releasing something unfinished can haunt it forever. Civ VII launched incomplete. I know, the understatement of the decade. It was pushed out into the limelight too soon. Its ultimate design vision is still very much in need of playtesting, iteration, and general polish for the game to be in release-worthy shape. The manner in which the world was introduced to the ambitious 7th entry in the storied Sid Meier's Civilization franchise did no favors to the magnitude and inherent controversiality that its proposed changes to the series' formula and identity entailed. TLDR. Civilization VII has not failed because it is an objectively bad game. The underwhelming reception of it in its first year is partly to blame on it being released way too early. As I will go over in this essay, there have always been a good framework and plenty of ideas that, regardless of personal opinion, can make Civ VII a good, enjoyable game. I myself was, at the start of my time with it, truly enjoying it. As time went by, however, I grew weary of the shortcomings in the product as it stood for 2025. That being said, the potential is absolutely there for a No Man's Sky-esque redemption arc. TrKz and 2K will just have to keep working real hard to earn it.
Let us all for death prepare, or on the last great journey fare.
This analysis is meant to be a documentation, a capturing of the zeitgeist, if you will, of the state of the game in its first year since initial release. The opinions and criticisms herein are based on the objective reality of the game as was from day one up until update 1.3.2 in February 2026, a full year since launch. The impact of the changes announced on February 2nd pertaining to the Test of Time update will be addressed where relevant.
Let me not then die ingloriously and without a struggle. So it shall be.
So it shall be.
Before we dive deep, I guess I could present my credentials for talking so passionately about Civ. I have, at the time of this recording, over 700 hours of recorded playtime in the Civilization series, most of which have been in single-player DD. Of those 700 hours, 460 have been in Civilization VI, my first game in the series, and the remaining 260-ish hours have been spent in just this year playing Civilization VII. Also, for whatever it may be worth, I am a 3D arts and video game design major, which has given me an inside understanding of a video game production's pipeline. From the structuring and laying out of a game in a game design document, through the establishment of a visual identity and art style, down to the actual production of 3D assets, modeling, rendering, lighting, texturing, etc. So, introductions and qualifications aside, let's now get to the analysis proper. By all means, do comment down below what you think about how TrKz and 2K may handle the launch of the game, all the way from design decisions, marketing campaigns, actual release dates. Also about what I'm gonna say up next, about my opinions, my criticisms. Do let me know what you think about them. Am I exaggerating? Do you think I'm onto something with some of these? And obviously, as we have recently learned, tell me what you think about the future, about the Test of Time update coming next spring. I love to have a mature, meaningful conversation with my fellow Civ fans in the comments down below. Now, knowing that we speak from a place of love and care for the genuine masterpiece that is the Civilization franchise, let's discuss the execution of its 7th entry. Roll the intro. The launch of Civ VII this time last year was hype, man. I didn't really follow much the pre-launch marketing campaign in 2024, as I was at the time knee-deep in my last year and a half of my majors, but by early 2025, and especially after watching the official announcement trailer with Brienne of Tart, I really bought into the hype. As soon as the Steam listings came up, I pre-purchased a Founders Edition of Civ VII for my PC, which is my main platform for playing Civ. And by early March, I had also bought a deluxe edition for my PS5 so that I could keep playing Civ VII while my computer was busy for dozens of hours at a time rendering my graduation project short film, Willem's Quest. And I gotta say, I was thoroughly loving the game for around 80 hours, rough edges considered. But as time went by, let's say the honeymoon ended. So, to begin our conversation about the rough launch of Civ VII, my dear fellow Civ fans and history nerds, we need to cast ourselves back to 2016. I know, right in the trends we are, to discuss one of the main talking points when discussing the state of Civ VII, the Civ launch cycle. When Civ VI launched in October 2016, the response from the community was broadly the same as the one we had in 2025. Some fans liked the changes TrKz made from 5 to 6, some didn't. One-tile specialty districts completely overhauled the way players interacted with and developed their cities. The substitution of the happiness mechanic in favor of amenities radically shifted the meta from tall to wide gameplay. TrKz took a handful of broad, daring swings when it came to innovating and improving upon the Civ formula. Some landed right away, some needed some further elaboration through DLCs for their full vision to come to fruition. In the meantime, many players, understandably, stuck with the already complete Civ V. VI's first expansion, Rise and Fall, released in February 2018, roughly 15 months after the base game, and brought 3 phenomenal mechanics to Civ VI. Number 1. Great Ages, the system that recorded meaningful events and developments of your civilization through history, and, assigning them different point values, tallied up your performance at the end of every in-game age to determine if you have earned a normal, golden, or dark age, the effects of which could completely transform your empire, positively or negatively. Number 2. Loyalty. This in-game calculation of empire population, city proximity, and city happiness became a game changer for Civ VI. No longer could the AI, or the player for that matter, thrust a settler right to a neighbor's border and aggressively take land from them, or stick an outpost right on the other's backyard. Not, at least, without calculated preparation. The loyalty mechanic became an instant hit with players, as it seamlessly integrated into the empire-building thought process and introduced another variable for players to account for, both in favor and against them. Number 3. Governors. The introduction of a quirky roster of characters with a defined set of skills and use cases to spice up the game and add layers of strategic complexity to it was also a very welcome addition to Civ VI. Though not created equal in the sense that some are more viable than others, Magnus Chopping Spree and Trading Center City, Pingala plus Oracle Great People Monopoly, Amani City-State Tour, each governor is viable and can provide a lot of value given the right circumstances, like stabilizing loyalty pressure in a bordered or conquered city. This, along 9 new civs, a bunch of new units, buildings, natural and man-made wonders, and some other minor features and mechanics, was the first step towards shifting player acceptance of Civ VI. The cherry on top of the Civ VI vision was placed a year later, in February 2019, with the arrival of the second expansion, Gathering Storm. Though lighter on flagship new mechanics when compared to Rise and Fall, Gathering Storm brought several smaller features that greatly expanded and filled out existing mechanics. Chief among these are the environmental events like river floods, volcanic eruptions, and storms, the expansion of engineering infrastructure with canals, dams, mountain tunnels, railroads, and flood barriers. The World Congress, a UN-like space for global diplomatic endeavors and resolutions. An evolution of the scientific and cultural victories. And last but not least, the introduction of a further bunch of new civs, buildings, units, wonders, even techs and civics to their respective trees. As I will be comparing the launch dates of Civ VI and Civ VII, and for the sake of thoroughness, I decided to boot up a game of vanilla Civ VI. After disabling a bunch of my quality of life and Vanilla Plus mods, I was able to get one through. Friedrich of Germany, or more like the Holy Roman Empire, you know? Deity, continents, standard everything. It was definitely an interesting experience. Naturally, the first thing that stuck out to me was the difference in UI and overall presentation. The city banner looks different, as does the world in general. Plains are yellower. First met neighbors, Alexandros and Piotr, off to a great start. The absence of governors also made me rethink my approach for the early decisions of the game. No Magnus means less value in early chopping. No Amani meant weaker to no city-state control. As I explore, I discover I'm in one of the corners of my continent, with Nan Madol to my south in the peninsula, Macedon to my northeast, Russia to my northwest, and Brazil further to my west. Not much room for expansion. As if on cue, Piotr declares an early, "They just plain don't like you," war on me. I managed to fend him off relatively easily thanks to the river and mountains surrounding my capital. Nothing won, but nothing gained. Except, he did manage to disrupt my early game momentum. Rough. Some general observations. Food used to work differently, right? Otherwise, I have no idea why my capital stayed at 2 population for a solid 50 turns, despite having good tiles to work. Also, I did not remember pantheons were changed sometime between Vanilla and Gathering Storm. I jumped out of my seat when I saw religious settlements available in turn 47, only to realize that it was a much worse version of the one we know today. There being 2 different pantheons for yields on plantations was also weird. On the city-state front, Amsterdam and Carthage, for instance, are no longer among the rotation because of the introduction of the Netherlands and Phoenicia as full-blown civs, of course. But damn, that Carthage suzerain bonus was nice! Once I got my empire back on track, +1 trade route capacity from building encampments bolstered my yields tremendously. I wish there were a mod or something that brought back this suzerain bonus to post Gathering Storm Civ VI. If there is, definitely let me know. Ultimately, this game ended up being nothing special. Thanks to the early war, my capital refusing to grow, and the deity AI making full use of their inflated yields, I was very much fighting an uphill battle. I was blockaded into only having 6 cities, and even still I was able to finish second-ish in the space race. Catherine de Medici, of all people, beat me to the finish line. The vanilla science victory was awkward. Playing vanilla Civ VI again after hundreds of hours of playing my lightly modded post-Gathering Storm version was definitely a fun experience. Anyway, this tangent was to remind myself that Civ VI, one of my favorite games of all time, wasn't always as slick as I know it now to be. It also needed time and good old tender love and care to become the game it is today. Back on topic. So, this little tangent having reminded me that games often need time, and with over 260 hours of Civ VII game time on my back, I will now go over in excruciating, opinionated detail about number 1, the things in Civ VII or changes made for Civ VII that I liked from the start. Number 2, the things or changes made in Civ VII that I disliked from the start or that I grew to dislike as I played on. And number 3, the things I am still undecided about. Also, as I want this essay to be constructive criticism and not just venting of grievances and frustrations, I will try to suggest for every point I go over some change or improvement. Also, just small disclaimer, I am aware of the possibility that someone in the big wide internet may have already suggested something similar. I claim no authorship on any of the criticisms and suggestions in this video. I am, after all, a very much invested member of the Civ community who has listened to the opinions and criticisms of many fellow Civ fans all over the internet. Having said that, let's begin with number 1, the things I have liked from the start about Civ VII. Number 1, meta progression for leaders is nice. Having every leader earn experience as you play and complete objectives with them adds a tangible avenue for encouraging and rewarding replayability. Having it be the way through which you unlock most mementos is fine, but it also ties unlocking some of the most worthwhile ones to a rather heavy grind. My experience has been that to get a leader to the max level of 10, you have to play through roughly 3.5 full games with him/her. Preferably completing as many legacy pets as possible along the way, as well as winning the game in the modern age, of course. Which, in terms of hours invested, considering that an average game of Civ on a standard size map with standard settings takes around 8 hours, totals up to an investment of 28 hours per leader. As a whole, I think leveling up individual leaders through gameplay is a net positive. Perhaps adding more levels and with them rewards, and decreasing the playtime required to unlock these levels across the board would be fair to keep this system not only evolving as the game's lifecycle advances, but to keep it a highlight of this entry in the franchise. Number 2, and speaking of meta progression, mementos are very cool. Caveats about the inflated requirements for unlocking them aside, the concept of having small nuggets of perks and modifiers that one can bring into a game to bolster strategy is very cool. I like how some mementos like Corona Civica perfectly blend with Civs like Carthage. Mementos add a light roguelike spin to a Civ franchise that I wouldn't have expected would work as well as it does for me. Number 3, and on the topic of pleasant surprises, navigable rivers are amazing. This is one feature I wholeheartedly would want to be retroactively brought to Civ VI. Having navigable channels to and from oceans and to traverse continents meshes so well with the early game exploration, and lends itself greatly to geopolitical and military strategies later down the line. I struggle for words to describe how good it feels to have rivers that aren't just a wee blue line in the map. They could stand to be longer and wider and bendier, you know? Number 4, narrative events are nice. Having some quirky pop up every now and then is fun. The stories that come up from them are a fun read. I am like 66% favorable to them, though. Most of the time, they just offer a binary, short-term choice that should be quite clear if you know what you should be doing. For example, if a choice offers you X amount of culture or Y amount of science in turn 32, one should always pick the culture, as it is generally the more valuable yield, more so early on. I'm not very clear on how I could suggest these be improved. Perhaps have more story-based events? Like more successive events that track your previous decisions. And spice up the rewards so that choosing is actually interesting. Add some tangible opportunity cost, more intense risk versus reward choices. Number 5. Commanders are a lot of fun. Civ VII aimed to radically shift the structure of warfare, cutting out, at least as of vanilla, the anti-cap class and having a single type of cavalry instead of heavy and light. Also, individual units no longer earn experience and with them promotions, and are thus more expendable than before. Instead, the new army commander units are the ones that earn experience from battles happening within their range of command. They are a fun mix-up to how we used to form our armies, and they allow for longer-term strategizing thanks to their extensive upgrade trees. I think they, as a feature and mechanic, are absolutely alright as they stand. Just, please, for the love of Sid Meier, have them bug-free for a single patch. I swear every time I've jumped back to play 7 since like 1.2.2, I have encountered a new bug regarding commander interactions. Number 6. Independent powers are a neat idea. As a spin on barbarian outposts, they elaborate on the foundation laid by the barbarian clans game mode in Civ VI in an interesting way. Though I still prefer the way they merged barbarians and city-states in the Civ VI game mode. Civ VII independent powers are essentially aggressive or neutral proto-city-states. You can choose to leave them alone if they're neutral, just defend yourself if they're aggressive, or go full Caesar in Gaul on them regardless of their status. Should you choose to be diplomatic, you can spend influence on them to help them develop into a city-state. This, however, is the point where Civ VII's take on city-states stops being a positive for me. I'll elaborate on this later. Number 7. Civ traditions are cool. Though I dislike the new government system, about which I'll talk later, every Civ having unique policy cards that can be carried over after they expire is very nice. Some traditions like Carthage's Suffets give game-long buffs to towns with the farming and mining specializations, which only grow more valuable with the passage of time. Traditions are certainly a net plus, since carrying them over from the age they unlock into the future only requires the culture investment tied to the researching of the civics with which they unlock, something that you would most likely do as a priority anyways. And speaking of specializing towns, number 8. Towns and cities. This new distinction about the potential and capabilities of new settlements both adds a strategic depth and decreases micromanagement. It requires adjustment on the player's side from the Civ VI way of scouting settlement locations and planning new settlements though, as realistically you can only really have, or want to have, 2 to 3 cities in antiquity because of the hefty conversion price and the recently added cost increase to buildings for every town you convert to a city. Number 9. Expanded leader roster. Man, I love Carolus Magnus. His Burger King crown is great and his round grandpa's belly feels so cozy. I want to give him a hug. In all seriousness, I do believe TrKz made the right choice by broadening the concept of who can be a civilization leader, expanding beyond the traditional criteria of historical leaders of state. From the fearsome pirate captain Edward Teach to the lesser-known great pharaoh Hatshepsut, including the brilliant Ada Lovelace, the wise Confucius, the cultural warlord Friedrich der Zweite von Preußen, the inventor and founding father Benjamin Franklin, the world's greatest explorer in Ibn Battuta, and the cunning Machiavellian himself, Niccolò Machiavelli. Most of which would have never fitted the previous requirements for joining the Civ Leaders Club, and now offer rather unique and distinct playstyles based on their profiles and historical escapades. Each of these new leaders brings their unique character and skills to the game, which leads me to number 10, Leader/Civ quests. Though suffering the same lack of real hard choices as some narrative events, having quests and objectives to pursue during an age relating to your leaders or Civ's traits is a nice quirk. The Tonga Civ's A Noble Task is a good example, as it merges the Tongans' early ocean-faring capabilities with their influence generation and city-state relations. Even more so, as I found out during one of the games I played in preparation for this video, this specific quest overlaps with Sayyida al-Huras, a diplomatic leader, offering you 2 rewards for suzeraining an independent power. My only real suggestion for these quests would be to give them, as suggested earlier in the narrative events section, more complex choices. Also tied to the attributes of a leader are number 11, Endeavors. I like having these little boosts and yields. Whether a friendly Civ offers them to you and you accept, which grants you free yields, or should you be able to invest influence, either supporting an endeavor offered to you, or offering one to your own to another leader. In most cases, endeavors are a plain win-win scenario, regardless of if you offer them to the AI or if they offer them to you. Number 12. Challenges. We're closing off this section with another instance of meta progression. From leader challenges regarding the repeated completion of thankfully soon gone legacy pets, to achieving specific milestones when playing as a given civ, to building a civ's associated wonder, or completing a handful of miscellaneous tasks. I find these small side tasks fun and engaging, and overall net positive, even though some are plain grindy. Now, please bear with me as I go over the things I never liked about Civ VII, or that I did like initially and eventually grew to dislike. This is going to be a bit of a longer section, as you have probably already seen in the chapters. So let's start with the big swings, if you will, the big fundamental changes. Number 1. Detaching civs and leaders. Probably the coldest take ever for a controversial Civ VII design choice. At launch, I was 66% positive about this idea. I was willing to give it a chance. Now, however, I am more opposed to it as a concept within the Civ identity, more so than as a mechanic within the game. I am aware of the benefits of mix and matching different skill sets for purposes of strategy and replayability. I love the synergies that Isabella's wonder-chasing playstyle has with Carthage's explosive land-grabbing expansion, Machiavelli's usage of the new influence yield paired with an influence-centered civ like Greece, or the absolute chaos that Blackbeard can unleash when leading the Republic of Pirates. However, Benjamin Franklin of Han China or Catherine the Great of the Dai Viet just doesn't sit right in my brain. Full transparency, this system works perfectly fine, gameplay-wise. It's just my acoustic brain who dislikes it as a choice for Civilization specifically, because detaching civs from the real-life historical leaders uproots the notion of role-playing and of historical fantasy that came with embodying a real character and leading his/her nation
from this early cradle of civilization on towards the stars.
Which leads me to number 2. Ages and the 3-act games. If detaching civs and leaders wasn't radical enough, TrKz also chose to break up the game in 3 distinct ages. The Antiquity Age, which corresponds to an early game of Civ, the Exploration Age, that roughly matches the late medieval and Renaissance eras, and the Modern Age, which represents a time span from the 1700s to the mid-20th century. The idea itself is not necessarily bad, but I think the execution, and most importantly, the motivation behind it, are. It has often been cited as a problem that the developers sought to fix in Civ VII, that a high percentage of Civ VI players did not see games through to the victory screen. This, TrKz has interpreted, is due to the inherent increase in actions per turn when the game reaches a certain point, roughly around the industrial/modern eras, and most crucially, the developers blame this on snowballing, the term used to refer to the point where a player, through planning and strong play, can become unstoppable, making a game essentially trivial. TrKz's solution for both problems, players abandoning games early and achieving an unappealable advantage, was to break a game of Civ into 3 self-contained chapters. Regardless of how well a player was doing at turn 120 of the Antiquity Age, whenever the age counter reaches 100% and the Exploration Age rolls over, they will be reset to a baseline of yields through the obsolescence of specialty buildings, expiration of policy cards, among other things. This essentially kills any momentum a player had accumulated, resetting their snowball potential and making the game more competitive for even civs that hadn't been doing great for the last, 100 turns. Does this even the playfield? Yeah. Did it need to? No. Punishing a player for doing well by cutting away their earned advantages is, at least to me, antithetical to the design philosophy behind Civilization itself, and is a betrayal to the mindset every player who engages with the endless complexity of Civ is motivated to master. Even more aggravating, age transitions were stark. The now called Regroup age transition setting, which was the only way to play Civ VII for months after launch, was a complete mood killer. You were one turn away from capturing an enemy city? Sorry, not only are all your troops teleported back to random tiles in your empire, but you're not even at war anymore. All the special buildings you played hard to unlock and build to boost your yields, carefully finding their best adjacencies, they are now useless, and even worse so, are an actual drag to your gold and happiness economy, and you must get rid of them ASAP. Furthermore, all your unlocked policy cards and policy card slots are gone. Also, all your units have been upgraded to age-appropriate versions. Thanks, I guess? All in all, I was skeptical about the ages since I found out about them. In addition to the gameplay implications, because of number 3, age-restricted civs. Remember the fantasy of making the Roman Empire become an industrial powerhouse that would win this space race? Or of having Georgia thrive under Tamar's iron-built jaw and become the #1 tourist destination on Trivago? Well, that was no longer a possibility, at least as stated above, as of update 1.3.2. As mentioned earlier, while producing this video, TrKz announced in their February 2nd developer update the coming of the Test of Time update, sometime in the spring of 2026. One of its flagship features being the introduction of systems to support playing as a single civ through the entire game. In this chapter, I will talk about the problems I had with age-restricted civs, as it had been since launch, arrival of recently announced changes notwithstanding. Back to it, the justification for having your civ change every age is the whole history through layers speech. Based on the fact that that is how historical civilizations evolved in real life, most often than not, literally and figuratively, building atop what others had built before. And yeah, that is technically true. But one does not play Civilization to have a realistic, historically accurate experience, right? A big part of the civ experience is the bonding that happens between a player and its empire throughout a game. Seeing your people flourish from a primitive settlement in the sea of wilderness into an interconnected hub for prosperity, all while preserving the same core values and abilities, rising and stabilizing themselves throughout the ages. That connection is harder to form and more so maintain if at regular intervals you are forced to switch the identity and customs of the people you are leading. And speaking of regularly scheduled, baffling changes, number 4, crisis. I can see how the concept was deemed appropriate. And it is also true to history. I mean, just take a look at the last couple centuries of the Western Roman Empire. When it rains, it pours. But man, did TrKz botch the execution of the crisis system at launch. Let's break down how this system integrates within a typical game. At around 70% progression of an age, the game will begin a crisis. These vary from plagues spreading uncontrollably through the world, to a handful of angry barbarian outposts appearing that one settable tile you left between your settlements, to suddenly having all your settlements be violently unhappy and randomly gift them themselves to other civs, to having every settlement following a religion, yours or not, rebel and destroy itself because of reasons, to having your carefully crafted economy collapse because screw you, it just is, etc. Which one will it be every game seems to be decided internally at random. If any of what I described feels extreme and unfun, trust me, it is even worse when you actually play it. In fact, in the Isabella Carthage game you have been seeing in the background, the crisis almost made me rage quit. In the Antiquity Age, I was doing quite well. I had settled across all my continent, preparing to have plenty of ocean access for pursuing the Treasure Fleet legacy path in the Exploration Age. I had even put my Numidian cavalry to good use and punished some forward settling by my neighbor Pacha Mimascuti. Ideally, loyalty pressure would have helped here, but alas. It was then, at around turn 100, with 70% age completion, that the game decided everyone was going to randomly trade settlements. The happiness/loyalty crisis was afoot. As I had just been at war, I was not able to juggle securing my gains with purchasing the allowed happiness buildings and trading for resources to offset the ridiculous arbitrary happiness deduction my settlements were imposed. By the end of the age, 2 of my towns had been gifted to random other civs. Crises, at least as they have been in the first year of Civ VII, are arbitrary, unfun, unnuanced wrenches that the game throws to punish the player with no real reason behind it. The sole solace in the current state of crises is that they can be disabled from the advanced settings menu. How could I improve them? Well, I think I have a couple ideas. Starting with rebuilding the crisis system. Make them not happen around predictable, rigid, and repetitive intervals, and most importantly, let us have some agency about them. Happiness buildings are too expensive to splash out in a pinch. Settlements in unrest, be it because of revolts or plague or whatnot, locking you out of any meaningful action within them is just ridiculous and leaves you no room for fixing the issue. Having to pivot into building an army when you had managed to remain a peaceful cultural empire just to fend off respawning barbarian camps in the most inconvenient spots, it's annoying. Crises should force you to make decisions on the spot. I even like the gradual escalation of them. But I do feel like we should be allowed more agency in how and when they originate, as well as in how we handle them. I think it was Potato McWhiskey who in one of his original reviews of Civ VII suggested, for example, that we could allow a settlement be infected by the plague in order to generate migrants and resettle them in other settlements for them to grow quicker. Maybe we could try and sway the game into activating the barbarian outpost crisis by reenacting Caesar's Gallian escapades. Then, having prompted that outcome, have an army ready to respond and use the responding outposts to farm commander levels. But hey, at least playing as Carthage, you should be able to complete the Silk Road's legacy path. Which reminds me, number 5, legacy paths are bad. Another disclaimer, it seems TrKz understood every word of the sentiment I'm going to share about the overall disappointing mechanic that were legacy paths and victory conditions, as both existing systems will be completely axed in favor of the new Triumphs system and new victory conditions coming in the Test of Time update. At first, I was enthusiastic about having short-term goals for every age. They all, at least for antiquity, roughly corresponded with something you would want to be doing at this stage of the game anyway. Be it expand and conquest through force, Pax Imperatoria, build early wonders for game-long benefits, wonders of the ancient world, set up economic and trading infrastructure, Silk Roads, or invest in scientific research and development, Great Library. So far, so good. The ones in the exploration age were always rougher though. Despite having a banger of a name, Non Sufficit Orbis is inconsistently achievable at best because of map generation and civ distribution, more on this later. The Enlightenment is ironically obscure at best because of the, even a year after launch, hideous UI, and overall lack of information available regarding building yields, specialists, etc. Treasure Fleets was borderline impossible to complete for months after release because of the heavy investment into science required to research shipbuilding, as well as the previously mentioned difficulties for even finding suitable resources in distant lands. It was, however, meaningfully fixed in Update 1.2.2 with the introduction of treasure convoys and a overall reworking of the legacy path. And Toshakana, the cultural one, well, saying the required system for achieving it, religion, is in an alpha state would be a compliment to alpha builds. What about the modern age then? Number 6, victory conditions / modern age legacy paths suck, man. I know I just said how Civ VI's vanilla space race was rough as well, but 7's is just plain bad. For one, it is paradoxically shorter and more dragged out at the same time. The science tree is much more streamlined in Civ VII, but the techs and especially the projects feel like they just take forever to complete. Maybe it is because of a lack of meaningful infrastructure like industrial zones to ease off the burden of the space race's project's production costs. The Railroad Tycoon is said to be among the hardest ones to achieve, and with my most recent experiences, I'll have to agree. Having had a successful Carthage opening, I felt poised to breeze to an economic victory. But dude, the research needed towards unlocking factories to even begin to put points on the board for the legacy path is arduous, which is also not at all helped by the post-launch increases in both gold and production costs for the factories themselves. Cherry on top of all this, once you score all 500 points, you need to take at least 2 turns per civ in the game for the Great Banker to do whatever it is he does. In a tiny map is not a problem, but 2 turns per surviving Cid add up quickly. Geographic society, the cultural win condition path is whatever. It is just a huge gold sink for the extremely overpriced explorer units, which are locked behind an early culture investment for a civic rush. I find it to be just the most uninteresting win condition in Civ VII. Just rush some civics, hoard a ton of gold, and purchase a handful of museums and explorers as early as possible. Rush them across the map, and then build the final World's Fair wonder. It's so uncomplex that people like Civ YouTuber Paisley Trees have already cheesed it to win a deity game in turn 7. Say what you will about the tourism mechanic tied to the culture victory in Civ VI being unfathomably complex, because it is, but at least Civ VI allowed 100 different ways to reach the goal of being the civ with the highest number of foreign tourists, be it by religious tourism, by building gorgeous national parks, producing great works of art, etc. Civ VII's cultural win condition is incredibly lazy and simple by comparison. Ideology/Project Ivy is also just lame. As a spin on Civ VI's domination victory, it kinda falls flat. First, you need to wait until both you and the AI have researched and joined an ideology. Then, have invested hefty amounts of gold and/or production to have an army with which to conquer whatever civ happens to land on opposing ideologies. Then, after blitzing a handful of their settlements, build the Manhattan Project and Operation Ivy projects, more like wonders since they occupy a tile in your cities. It is, as is Civ VII's space race, yet another production and science sink, plus a smaller culture one to reach an ideology soon. Though admittedly quicker than a traditional domination victory, it trades the former's full-blown investment into military and conquest in favor of just collecting tokens to score points in the ideology board and then sink loads of production into underwhelming projects. I mean, Operation Ivy is just throwing a fart in the ocean. Well, having discussed my gripes with the current/launch version of legacy paths and win conditions, I think it's just fair to praise TrKz for listening to community feedback and daring to remove those systems entirely. Details are still light about how exactly the new Triumphs system will work, but they have declared that it will be completely replacing the current A-specific railroady legacy paths and open up significantly the ways to achieve the cultural and economic victories. Science, as far as I can tell, will remain tied to the space race, and the military win seems to be falling back to the traditional domination playstyle. Overall, great signs for the future. The Test of Time update is a great first step towards getting Civ VII to the place it always needed to be. Can't wait to find out more about the upcoming changes as further playtests are carried out in preparation for their tentative spring launch. However, great signs for the future aside, there is more I have to go over in this section. Let's now move on to the smaller swing changes I did not like. Starting with number 7. Settling, resources, trading, and roads. Not being able to settle on resources is a big negative for me personally. Now you are forced to plan around much more restricted lands because of this. I will say in favor of the design team that they hit the nail on the head with the way resources now give distinct bonuses instead of just flat yields when improved. This opens up avenues for meaningful decisions when scouting, settling, and assigning resources to settlements. However, we have to come back to the actual execution of ideas. Firstly, the resource screen has a lot of room for improvement. It can be very finicky to navigate, the design itself is impractical beyond the exploration age, among other gripes. Resource Resorts by bsani is in the top 3 most downloaded Steam Workshop mods of all time for a reason. More on the already beaten to death horse of the UI ahead. Also changed in Civ VII is the way you create roads to connect your cities. In Civ VI, all civs aside from Rome would need a traveling trader from one city to another to connect them by road. I liked that idea. It made sense and enabled strategic depth. In Civ VII, every settlement, and I quote, within land trade route range, end quote, automatically creates a road back to the capital when founded. This way, having road connections enables you to move resources from, for example, a town to your capital. Great, right? Well, sometimes. I cannot tell you how many times the geography near my spawn has screwed me over. An unfortunate mountain range, or even a single tile of coast or lake can make it so you cannot move that all-important cotton resource to your capital, essentially isolating that settlement from the rest of the empire and rendering all resources therein useless. And as far as I know, there is nothing you can really do until the exploration age, when the obscure concept of the trade network expands to include embarking trade routes. Merchants are the unit in the limelight for the changes in this section. Once unlocked, their main function is to be sent to the borders of a foreign city and establish a trade route. More like disappearing into the ether and magically cloning a copy of every single resource within the city's borders. Their secondary function is to sacrifice them to Sid Meier in exchange for a fully built road from the settlement they're at into another, thus enabling, for example, a town's food surplus to be sent to a connected city. I don't really dislike these specific changes about the usage of merchants though, I'm just meh about them. What I do think is worse off in Civ VII is how you get to have more trade routes. Instead of developing your infrastructure and economic capabilities through markets and lighthouses, you have to go to Number 8. Leader interactions and diplomacy. Where to begin? Well, let's do with the obvious. Leader screens and interactions with them have been in an objective decline. Gone are the days of the grandiose, full of character environments of Civ V, and the cozy, hand-painted backgrounds of Civ VI. Even then, one constant remained. The leaders addressed you directly, as their equal. They look right into the camera and say their piece. Now, in Civ VII, we don't get talked to directly, much less a proper window into them, to their people and culture. In Civ VII, we, the players, are mere spectators of the interactions between two people. All we get now is a third-person view of two characters making guttural sounds to each other from the opposite sides of the screen. The only hints of character left being their color, a scheme applied to the gigantic banner embroidered with their Civ emblem behind them. But that is just a problem some of us have with presentation. What about the actual gamey part? For Civ VII, TrKz introduced a new currency, influence. Generated through specific buildings, bonuses, and leader and civ abilities, it is the token with which every single leader interacts with one another. Yes, every tiny thing revolves around and uses influence in Civ VII. Wants to explore into another empire's land? That would be X amount of influence for open borders, which incidentally are now enforced from turn 1 instead of having to be unlocked in the civics tree. Want to have more trade routes with another civ? Well, that costs Y amount of influence. Another leader wants to denounce you to worsen your relationship with them? Well, they had to spend H amount of influence to do that, and you can block the sanction by spending set amount of influence. Which is all fine and dandy, if it weren't for the fact that influence is pretty much the hardest yield to generate. Even when playing as influence-favored civs and leaders, you will always have a dozen of potential uses for it. Now, the picture gets more complex when considering that influence expenditure is the sole way to handle diplomacy. Handling the DDAI in Civ games is already hard. The "they just plain don't like you" messages in Civ VI are goated memes. Leader relationships in Civ VII, though, are, in my opinion, plainly the worst. How things stood between another leader and you depended on their different agendas, whether you traded with them, how much of a threat you posed to them, etc. It was all deity difficulty bullshit notwithstanding, rather clear and manageable. Small tangent, it is also important to consider that there are no longer open-ended trades. No longer can you approach a leader and offer them to trade 25 gold per turn and a copy of one of your luxuries for 20 iron and a great work of writing. The extent of trades and offers available to another leader is, as of update 1.3.2, limited to trading settlements in a peace deal. That's it. Also gone is the chance to ask another leader to promise to stop doing something, be it spread their religion to you or settle near you. Also, the math behind relationships in Civ VII is just muddier. For one, the UI doesn't care to show who, for instance, denounced who when viewing their relationship panel. Another annoying factor in leader relationships is the base penalty for having borders touch. Yes, a single tile of adjacent land is enough to irremediably worsen your relationship with another leader. Want to mend things with an unfriendly leader by offering one of your unique endeavors? A roll of the dice. If they accept it, relationships might improve somewhat. If they refuse it by using influence, a huge penalty for the relationship follows. Let's talk about endeavors a bit more. Part of the detaching leaders from Civs was giving each leader a pair of attributes pertaining to their preferences and perks. A leader in Civ VII can be two of scientific, cultural, economic, expansionist, militaristic, or diplomatic. With each of these attributes comes a corresponding endeavor, a diplomatic action proposable to another leader that, if accepted or supported, gives bonus yields to both parties. These are positive uses of influence from one leader to another, but there are also negative ones. Sanctions. The basic gist of them is to, through the use of influence, apply a percentage deduction to another player's yields. All fine and dandy. A real hater move, honestly, to spend your hard-earned influence in detriment of another player. What baffles me personally is that the affected player has the chance to refute them by spending influence of their own. That is not how real-life sanctions work, right? I mean, I don't think Putin could have spent X amount of whatever to prevent being shunned from European markets. I understand that the ability to repel sanctions is mostly for gameplay balance, it just feels funny to me that you could have a say in losing 20% of your food income. Before we leave the topic of influence and the entire diplomatic system being centered around it, let's visit both extremes of diplomatic relationships. Alliances are now unlocked once you have a very positive relationship with another leader, be it because of agendas, trade, endeavors, etc. The alliance unlocks mutual open borders and, this is a thing I absolutely dislike, forces you into wars. Whenever your ally enters a war, you have the option to join it on his/her side, or stay neutral and break the alliance. Again, very unnuanced. As for wars, they now have, apart from the ever-obscure war weariness mechanic, another layer built also around influence. War support. Basically a how justified this conflict is meter. Formal wars, which can only be declared against leaders with which you have a hostile relationship, have a 0 war support penalty for whoever declares them. If their relationship is unfriendly, whoever declares it receives a -2 war support penalty, a -3 for the aggressor if neutral, a -4 if friendly, and a -5 if helpful. Add a further -5 to the aggressor if the target of the declaration of war is Harriet Tubman. Though offsettable through attribute points and the Gate of All Nations Wonder, war support is yet another crucial influence sink. Players are encouraged to spend ever-increasing amounts of influence to add +1 to whatever the current state of the war is. This modifier affects gameplay in both the happiness penalties applied to every settlement while at war, as well as on the battlefield itself, as every war support point a Civ has in its favor translates to +1 combat strength in all instances of combat. All of this to point out how influence as a yield is severely overextended. And I have not even gotten to a previous point I left inconclusive on purpose before. Number 9. City-states are severely rigid and lack personality. I previously praised the independent power half of this mechanic, highlighting how them being either aggressive or neutral from the start offered strategic room. Well, once you have spent a significant amount of influence, you can make them become a city-state. First, let's understand how city-states used to work in Civ VI to fully appreciate the state of them in Civ VII. In 6, a city-state would have a general set of bonuses depending on its type, scientific, cultural, industrial, economic, militaristic, or religious, and a unique suzerain bonus. Geneva, a scientific city-state, boosted your science while at peace. Rapa Nui let you build the Moai unique improvement. Zanzibar offered unique luxury resources to help improve your empire's amenities. Each had something special to offer. The way players interacted with city-states in Civ VI was through envoys, a sort of currency that players generated passively or through specific tasks. First meeting a city-state granted one envoy there, completing the task they gave you at the start of every age granted another, etc. The system had a lot of depth and nuance, but it boiled down to this. The Civ who had the most envoys at any given city-state at the start of a turn benefited from its unique suzerain bonus. This made being the suzerain of a city-state you valued become a constant race to keep ahead of the pack. You could use a spy to fabricate a scandal and make another Civ lose a bunch of envoys there. You could invest in the Diplo quarter and slot in some policy cards to boost your passive production of envoys. It was a constant, very fun minigame within a game of Civ. Now, in Civ VII, becoming the suzerain of a former independent power just requires you to be either the first to spend influence on them, or to spend a lot of influence to beat whoever started befriending them first. And once you are the suzerain of a city-state, the only way to stop being it is to either spend a bunch more influence to absorb it into your empire, or to have it be conquered by another Civ, which, even more boringly, cannot turn it back to a city-state with them as their suzerain. Yes, even if you were to capture a conquered city-state, you cannot liberate them and restore their independence. You are stuck having to integrate them into your empire. Well, the whole minigame for keeping suzerainty is gone, but at least every independent power / city-state still has a unique bonus, right? I mean, just look at how well researched and diverse they are. Nope! Once you become their suzerain, you get to choose from a list of generic bonuses related to the type of city-state they are: scientific, cultural, diplomatic, military, expansionist, or economic. So, no more minigame for gaining and maintaining suzerainty, no more unique bonuses. Oh yeah, and speaking of lame bonuses, number 10. Pantheons and religions are lame and age restricted. Pantheons used to be a crucial breaking point for a game of Civ. Finding a relic in a tribal village, getting a faith injection from a goody hut, or spawning near faith yielding tiles was game changing because it meant getting an early pick at a very strong Pantheon bonus. Religious settlements is obviously goated, nothing can beat a free early settler, but there are plenty other extremely valuable choices depending on your Civ, strategy, and available resources. Pantheons in Civ VI were early empire-wide bonuses that lasted the whole game. Dance of the Aurora was as valuable in turn 25 as was in turn 250. Now, in Civ VII, not only are Pantheon bonuses less impactful, but they also now always require an altar building to apply their perks to any given settlement, which in a city might set you back a couple of turns of production, but in a town requires an investment of 360 gold. Not cheap. And cherry on top, the mere existence of said pantheons is age-restricted to the Antiquity Age. Yes, that code your people have been following for thousands of years has a strict expiration date. So, pantheons now offer less powerful bonuses, require a hefty fee to even apply said bonuses, and even after said investment, disappear after the first third of the game. Yay! Now, let's talk about religions. Of course, we mean the in-game implementations of them in the Civilization franchise. Let's not get silly and start modding the conversation with the real-life versions, please. I trust that every single one of you guys watching is an intelligent adult with a fully developed frontal lobe. In Civ VI, first you researched astrology. With it, you unlocked the Holy Side district, and through it and its shrines, you were able to gain a prophet who would found your religion. You choose a follower belief, which are generally the strongest ones: feed the world, choral music, work ethic. And then one either of a founder, worship, or an enhancer belief. All of which translate to in-game bonuses meant to boost your strategy. Additionally, through the Apostle Religious unit, you could evangelize your religion in order to assign one of all 4 belief types to it and unlock the potential of your religion. In a typical game of deity Civ VI, all available religions are founded by the start of the classical era, and would, from then on, spread worldwide, all the while contributing to the development of the civs that founded them all the way through to the victory screen. Now, in Civ VII, after the Pantheon's age out of the game when transitioning from the Antiquity to the Exploration age, the spiritual void left behind is filled with religions. Gone are your Pantheon beliefs, and your obsolete altars need to be replaced with temple buildings. Upon the completion of your first, you are prompted to found your religion. This time, as religious relics are the only way to complete the Toshakana cultural legacy path, you have to choose, aside from a follower belief, a reliquary belief, which determines where you need to activate missionaries in order to generate the 12 relics to win the cultural legacy path. There is, allegedly, ways to evangelize your religion, aka to add more beliefs to it, but these methods have been infamously obscure since launch. Well, where to begin? Civ VI had, from launch, an extremely nuanced religion system including mechanics like religious pressure, 5 different religious units, theological combat, plethora worship, enhancer, follower, and founder beliefs that each offered unique, viable, and valuable bonuses. All of this based on the faith currency that enabled endless diversification later in the game through rock bands, naturalists, the Grandmaster's Chapel, or the Jesuit education belief. In the current state of Civ VII, once you get your 12 relics, there is no more use for all that investment you made into getting them. Missionaries have to be either hard-bailed or purchased with gold, as there isn't a faith currency of Civ VII. No apostle unit means no further evangelization. No religious pressure means population and proximity no longer factor into the spreading of a religion. All of this, plus the lack of theological combat, make it so spreading and maintaining your religion becomes a cat and mouse game of sending missionaries to use their action twice per city. Once in a rural tile, another one in an urban district. Regardless of population, 2 uses is all it takes to convert a city. And yeah, I almost forgot. Religions, same as pantheons, are erased with the age transition. Yep. All your hard work to get a religion and convert the world to it is all summarized in a small legacy attribute point you get to choose at the start of the modern age. This system is just far too basic, too rigid, and well, unbecoming of a game as complex as Civ. I wouldn't say just port back the Civ VI system into Civ VII, because it would require a wholesale reworking of age structures, yields, etc. But maybe to try and replicate the Civ VI system in Civ VII. Number 11. Settlement limit and racing penalties. In my opinion, the former is an overcorrection aimed to please the people who complain about wide play being too viable in Civ VI, and the latter makes it so dealing with the former is punishing for punishment's sake. As I explained at the top, the amenity system introduced in Civ VI gave players more agency when it came to managing the well-being and overall happiness of their people. Through clever planning, trade, and strategic settling, a player could easily manage to keep productive an empire of 15+ cities. People who preferred Civ V's take on tall play, however, voiced their preference for a change in that regard. Fast forward to Civ VII, and now we have an explicit ceiling for how many settlements we should have. A glass ceiling in most cases, but a ceiling nonetheless. Every settlement you have over your current limit imposes a -5 happiness penalty to all individual settlements, up to a maximum of -35. This, just said plainly, is arbitrarily punishing and limiting. Not to sound as a Civ VI fanboy, but I will always prefer to have, as mentioned in the crisis section, some agency. The glass ceiling metaphor is not just for flair though. With careful maneuvering, a player can navigate around the hefty penalties and keep a healthy empire despite far exceeding the explicit limit. As I've said before, the motivation behind and the execution of an idea is what I consider mostly. As a conscious move towards limiting a player's creativity and expression, I fundamentally dislike the idea of a settlement limit, which only gets more in your face when you consider the other concept in this section's name: racing penalties. Granted, in Civ VI you could get away far too easily with just deleting a conquered city in the snap of a finger, but I think Civ VII's solution is a bit too harsh. As discussed earlier, influence is already a far too valuable, far too overextended yield. Having the choice to keep a conquered settlement, adding it to your settlement limit counter, and furthermore have it drag your overall happiness by applying the occupied settlement debuffs, or receiving an influence penalty while raising it and a further age-long influence deduction once it's gone, is for me no real choice at all. As I see it, it is a lose-lose situation. You either sacrifice a valuable slot in your settlement cap for a questionable settlement, or lose a bunch of influence per turn for the entirety of the age. Happiness, however in demand it may be to prevent negative yield modifiers, is still far easier to come by, and less overarching than influence. And adding onto the settlement woes I hinted at earlier, number 12. Maps are too crowded, and even worse so, unevenly distributed. Civ distribution at the start of the game has always been a sticking point for me since the very start of my Civ VII experience. Due to the distant lands mechanic, TrKz decided to sway the distribution of civs at the start of a game. A standard game of Civ has always had an even number of civs, right? And in previous games, that even number of civs would be spread evenly in a map. Let's say we boot up a standard continents game. If there are 8 civs in the game would divide them and have 4 spawn in one continent and the other 4 in another. Intuitive. Perfectly fine, right? Well, in order to make room for settable land in what Civ VII would consider your distant lands, TrKz decided to crowd your home continent, which is to say, Civ VII's generation will always have more civs spawned near you. This, of course, encourages more early struggles for land against other civs, which might suit many players' preferences just fine, but to me personally, it doesn't. Not that I dislike early wars in Civ, though they are not my first choice unless my Civ leader lean into them, but add the near assurance of early war to the previous point about how limited you are when it comes to acquiring settlements and the hefty penalties that come with getting rid of them, and you get a rather uncomfortable situation. Number 13. Governments and policies. Yep, I didn't forget to talk about this. At the start of every age, you will be prompted to choose one government type. All 3 choices present the same type of bonuses, they just change the specific yields and production discounts they offer when in a celebration. In the Antiquity Age, you have to choose either boost science and infantry production, culture and wonder production, or food and building production. Move ahead to the Exploration Age and the governments offer the same type of boring choice. Boost food and cavalry and naval units, gold and overbuilding, culture and civilian and support units. This age, however, does have 3 more government choices tied to the magnificent Revolution crisis. As you can guess, I am thrilled to have to endure a vanilla Civ VII crisis, only to later be forced to choose a new, lame, punishing government. And yeah, the modern age also has 3 new choices for boost combinations disguised as governments. How terribly uninspired. I hate to have to compare Civ VII to Civ VI again, but I can't fathom why they would choose to replace the perfectly functional, deep and nuanced Civ VI government systems with this. It's truly puzzling. I always find myself choosing the same governments for every single game of Civ VII because I already know which bonuses are universally more useful than the rest. In Antiquity, culture is the scarcest yield, so you choose that to keep ahead of the curve. In Exploration, gold and overbuilding. In Modern, Elective Republic, because chasing down a win condition boils down to rushing either techs or civics. They need to completely overhaul this system. I know saying, do this as was in Civ VI is not also very productive of me, but honestly guys, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Maybe have the different government tiers from 6 be age restricted to fit them into the age structure. Obvious reworks would have to be done in order to accommodate for the lack of great people which Classical Republic busted, for instance, and to adapt into the new system they devised for policies, this section's second topic. Policies in Civ VII are no longer an assigned type like they did in 6. Gone are the distinctions between military, economic, diplomatic, and wildcard policies. Now, the only difference is that some are Civ specific and last the whole game once unlocked, traditions, and all the rest are age restricted. This considered, the way we unlock policy slots was also radically changed in Civ VII. As there are no longer any government types and tiers, the increase in government size, aka how many policies you can have active at any given time, is now tied to how many celebrations your Civ has earned in the current age. Every new celebration unlocks a new policy slot. And yeah, once again, this does reset every age. So not only are all policy cards unlocked in the Antiquity Age Civic tree gone by the time the age ends, but all policy slots earned are as well. So what could TrKz do to breathe back life into these oversimplified systems? Honestly, I can't think much beyond what I've already said for governments. Let me know what you think could work for governments and policies in the comments down below. Number 14. I'd be remiss not to mention the most talked about issue in Civ VII since forever, the UI. User interfaces make or break games. Simple as. And for games as deep and intricate as Civilization, this goes double. Players need to be able to read what is going on, to easily understand how the systems at play work by themselves and in conjunction with others. And these are just the technical considerations. The UI being pleasant to look at, and most importantly, complete with information, is beyond fundamental. Which is why Civ VII has failed catastrophically since day one. Not only is the UI awful looking, having gone for a soulless grey on grey, very hipster, Apple-coded, minimalistic design philosophy with hideous oversized rectangles, but it is also insultingly insufficient in most cases. Hell, with update 1.3.2, the latest one, coming 1 year after launch, we are finally getting some nested tooltips and extra Civilopedia entries. Don't get me wrong, it is great to be getting them, but I don't think one would be entitled to think that a complete Civilopedia and basic quality of life features in the UI, which, excuse me a little tangent before segueing, but how are we still not able to swap tiles between settlements a year after launch? I know, it may be a lot to ask for a AAA game, charging $70 in the year 2025. Which also leads me to number 15. Lastly, but absolutely not leastly, $30 DLC the day of launch. Honestly, who in 2K thought we would be okay with this? Let's say it as it is. Any DLC launching within 3 months of release is just cut content out of the base game to be sold separately. As good as Carthage, Ada Lovelace, and Great Britain are, I can't help resenting the circumstances of their inclusion in 7 through the Crossroads of the World collection. Added insult to injury is the fact that for a while there, the unique unit for Great Britain, the Revenge battleship, didn't even have a unique model, it used the generic battleship one. Breathe. Okay, thankfully they have started to mend this somewhat. First with offering the Tides of Power collection for free from November to December 2025, and more recently by making the newest Civ VII leader, the one true best homie Gilgamesh, free with update 1.3.2. Well, we have come to the end of this section. I know it was quite a bit to say, but yeah, that's the last thing I'm gonna have to say about the things I never liked about Civ VII. Hopefully this next section about things I'm undecided is gonna be a little bit shorter. I'm gonna talk about the things I kind of, sort of like, things I do not really despise, and just things I'm meh about. Number 1. Leader Attribute Points. This system is very much tied to mementos, which I like, and to the existing legacy pets, which I disdain. In concept, I like that there are ways to more granularly buff some aspects of your game, whether that be a slight increase in gold per turn for every city center/town hall, extra combat strength against independent powers, +1 free war support, or an instant increase in population. There are not only strong but varied bonuses to be found in this system. My gripe with it is how dependent the bulk of your attribute point acquisition is on the, thankfully on its way out, legacy path scorings. I should also mention that most leader and civ quests have attribute points as potential rewards, which is very nice. Thanks to the changes announced in the Test of Time update, this attribute tree system might eventually swing up in my estimation, but as it stands, I'm somewhat 50-50. Number 2. Espionage Actions. Yet another potential use of influence. These actions require an upfront payment of the yield and take between 9 to 15 turns to complete. Though not completely blockable, should the spy fail to go unnoticed either by bad luck or by counter-espionage, the victim will receive a bonus of influence per turn, while the perpetrator receives a penalty. Yet again, this is a simplification from how espionage worked in Civ VI. There, civs could train spy units and send them either to counter-spy districts in their own cities, or to perform a wide array of offensive espionage actions against other civs, ranging from stealing tech boosts, stealing great works, stealing gold, neutralizing governors, sabotaging factories, dams, spaceports. The options were vast. My issue with the current state of espionage is, again, and you might spot a theme here, the lack of agency. A mission failing or succeeding seems to be completely determined at random. You pay the upfront cost, and as far as I know, there is no way to influence the outcome. Even more so, there is no way to build on previous successes, like how spy promotions improve your future success rates in Civ VI. Also, espionage actions as well as endeavors and sanctions can only be carried out one of each type at a time. This, once again, limits the player's capabilities to fully invest into the system. In Civ VI, a player could actively increase their spy capability by engaging with the game, enable them to cover more ground and get better results through clever usage of the system's mechanics. In Civ VII, espionage just feels like a minor side activity you can, if you happen to be able to spare a couple hundred influence, indulge every once in a while, instead of the absolute game-changing risk versus reward system that was in Civ VI. Any change to make Civ VII's espionage more expensive would, I wager, require reworking most of the diplomatic relation rules, from adjusting influence generation to allowing more actions to be taken simultaneously. So for now, I don't really have a concrete proposal for improving espionage beyond copy what was in Civ VI. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Number 3. A strategic resource rework. All the former classics are back from Civ VI. Iron, horses, niter, coal, oil. Except they are no longer a requisite consumable to train and maintain the associated units. Fielding cavalry no longer requires horses, and tanks apparently do not require oil to work. Instead, these strategics now buff the combat strength of a specific class of unit at a rate of +1 combat strength per improved copy, up to a ceiling of +6. Iron buffs infantry and cavalry horses. I just don't know how I feel about this change. On the one hand, it removes the resource star dependency we have in Civ VI, which made it so the luck of the map generation could leave a civ like Macedon with neither iron nor horses accessible in order to field their unique units. On the other hand, it makes all civs be not at all dependent on their surroundings when it comes to fielding any type of unit they want, which feeds into the larger topic of number 4, all stars are now viable. The endless re-rolling of maps is nobody's fondest memory of Civ VI. Especially when you knew specifically what you were looking for in a start location, finding one that meets your personal standards was often tedious. In Civ VII, now that is practically gone. Due to the buffs to all tile improvements, even desert failed starts are doable in Civ VII. Being able to build farms and even desert plains, for example, eradicated the notion of bad starts in Civ VII. And all of this stems from number 5. No more builders. Man, this one has me torn. Builders were such an integral part of the Civ VI experience, being able to give you early slight boosts by improving an early luxury or hitting Eurekas, only to then explode into the limelight when unlocking feudalism and the serfdom policy card. Builders were the unsung MVPs of every Civ VI game. They were there from the start and never ceased to be useful. For Civ VII, however, TrKz sought to make the players' lives easier by removing the burden of builder micro. This meant tile improvements are now tied to population growth events, which prompt the player to choose an unimproved tile to assign the newly gained population to, automatically creating a rural tile based on the type of terrain they're in. Farms for plains, woodcutters for forests and rainforest, mines for hills, and fishing boats for coastal or river tiles. Another nugget of nuanced strategy gone in consequence is the possibility of chopping/harvesting tile features. This debate about should I chop these woods now became a real thing with the introduction of Machinus in Civ VI. Getting an early injection of food, gold, or production would compound greatly, allowing you to, for example, place a district earlier, finish a wonder before someone else, or purchasing a builder to improve an extra copy of a luxury to sell. Once again, relieving the player of the burden of builder micro costed us another dimension for opportunity cost and strategic play. I understand this change is so deeply ingrained in the way TrKz has built Civ VII to work from the very core that there is no point in even entertaining change suggestions. Number 6. Last but not least, the new way fortifications work. Again, let's remember how this used to work in Civ VI. There we had city center walls and encampment districts as the main means of defense for a city. Walls were 4-tiered, from ancient to medieval to renaissance, all of which needed to be built or purchased with faith using Valeta's suzerain bonus, whereas the final tier, urban defenses, were automatically given to all cities once the steel tech was researched. Encampments, on the other hand, were a specialty district that also, as walls, enabled a range attack. The combination of walls and strategically placed encampments was a rather simple yet powerful way to defend one's empire in Civ VI. And on the offense, the goal was also very clear: break down the city's defenses and capture the city center. For Civ VII, the fortification system was reworked. Instead of walls being only present in the city center and supplemented by one encampment per city, we now have the possibility to build walls from the city center and extend them out to every urban district, creating a branching system of fortifications that feels very organic. All of these fortified tiles, in turn, contribute towards the active defense of a city. An attacker now has to capture every single fortified tile in a settlement in order to be in control of it. The idea of this I actually like. It is once again the execution that leaves me undecided. The problem with the implementation of this new fortification system is that there is often unclear which tiles are fortified. When attacking, especially when you have a dozen units on screen, it becomes very hard to tell which tiles you have to capture. Also, I have to say, and you will be able to see this in the clip right now, that the lack of city ranged attacks becomes a real detriment, at least for me personally, when it comes to realizing that a settlement is under attack. Since defending them no longer requires active input, it is way too easy to get caught up in the chaos of war and just miss the one notification from the 10 that popped up in any given turn saying that a settlement is being attacked. In the Gilgamesh game I played in preparation for this video, I lost a settlement in a war I had to join to keep my alliance with my Ibru Augustus, and I didn't realize it until like 10 turns after the fact. That complaint aside, I do like the idea of this new system of fortifications. It is once again the execution that leaves me undecided. The problem with the implementation of this new fortification system is that there is often unclear which tiles are fortified. When attacking, especially when you have a dozen units on screen, it becomes very hard to tell which tiles you have to capture. This lack of visual clarity leads players to confusion and frustration. Which leads me to number 7, art style and visual clarity. This point probably hits closest to me because of my background as a 3D artist. Granted, my only real experience with matters of designing an art style in actual production is my short film, Willem's Quest, but still, let's start with the obvious here. Civ VII is gorgeous to look at. A little zoom into the terrain, the buildings, units, anything is enough to appreciate the ludicrous talent and hard work that went behind the scenes for the purposes of building Civ VII. Every building is lovingly and carefully modeled and textured, with Civ-specific appropriate variants to further immerse the players. All units have great animations for movement and combat. Taking a closer look at anything in Civ VII is enough to make your jaw drop. The tiny problem here is you do not play Civ zoomed in. Many people criticize at launch, and a few even still do, Civ VI's art style. Coming from the mimetic-like art style of Civ V, VI's stylized visuals were deemed too unserious by many players. And yeah, 6 does look comparatively cartoonish when put next to 5. But it had a reason, too. Character-wise, think of Gilgamesh's godlike physique, Cleopatra's playfulness, Moctezuma's royal outfit. None of them would have been as memorable if Firaxis tried to ground their designs in reality. Let's now think gameplay-wise. As mentioned earlier, Civ VI introduced 1-tile specialty districts. 1 tile for the blue-colored, science-yielding campus, another yellow one for the commercial hubs, and a purple one for the theater squares, etc. Firaxis' masterstroke was as understated as making everything that does something specific look the same. Wants to find a campus in a city? Look for blue. Gold for the gold-yielding commercial hubs, red for military encampments. It was simple, and thus brilliant. Now, the issue with Civ VII is twofold. No more 1-tile specialty districts means a science-yielding library can be built in the same tile as an influence-yielding monument. Doesn't sound like a problem, right? In fact, I believe that quarter would be beautiful to look at. Well, that's why I've discussed this issue of no longer having easily identified color-coded buildings in this section. It's more a matter of aesthetics and readability. Don't get me wrong, as I've mentioned earlier, the overall UI does not help at all to alleviate the concerns derived from no longer being able to quickly identify where your barracks is in any given settlement. In fact, I can totally see this issue being a deal breaker for many people. Let me know what you think about this change in design philosophy for Civ VII down in the comments. Well, that's the end of every individual feature I wanted to highlight about Civ VII. From the ones I love, to the ones I'm not sure I love, to the ones I am definitely sure I don't. If you made it this far into the video, please comment down below, "All hail the king in the north." Moving on and onto the last chapter of this video. What are we to make about all of this when considering the future of Civ VII? I want to come back to the argument that sparked the last, however many minutes of discussion, the Civ launch cycle. In terms of the previous game in the series, Civ VI, we are still well within the margin of patiently waiting for expansions to help further the vision of the game. If we were to, unrigorously mind you, follow the pace at which Firaxis released 6's expansions, Rise and Fall and Gathering Storm, we would be looking at a mid to late 2026 or early 2027 release window for the first major expansion to Civ VII. I made sure to note that was an inaccurate, unnuanced assessment because of the major differences between the developments of Civ VI and Civ VII. More on the altered production timelines for 7 ahead. In the meantime, let's talk about the second main talking point regarding the poor reception of Civ VII, the rule of thirds. This concept was first made public knowledge by Sid Meier himself in a 2014 interview, and I quote, "For the Civilization games we have a rule of thirds. 1/3 traditional gameplay, 1/3 is improved from the last version, and 1/3 is brand new." End quote. What this rule boils down to is, when approaching a new entry in the Civ franchise, roughly 60% of the new game should feel familiar to players of the previous entry, be it because that's how it worked or because it is a slight expansion on what used to work. This way, loyal, returning players can find comfort in the systems and mechanics they know while they come to learn the new ones. The problem with Civ VII is, as expressed by me in this video and by many members of the community throughout 2025, is that it feels like TrKz broke their own rule when designing Civ VII. Between detaching leaders and civs, breaking up the game into distinct, self-contained chapters, making civs age-logged, removing builders, implementing rigid, railroady legacy paths and victory conditions, etc., many of us would say Civ VII has well over 1/3 new stuff when compared to Civ VI. Even then, bending the rule wouldn't have made Civ VII necessarily bad, if only the changes made within the slice of the new stuff weren't as radical and defiant of the traditional Civ formula as they were. I won't try to speculate the reasons behind the design leadership at TrKz deciding to make such daring moves. Regardless of if it was a genuine desire to innovate, being influenced by competitors and other genres, catering to specific sections of the fanbase, or trying to reach out to new fans altogether, these changes were approved and implemented years ago. The team thus committed to releasing the game with them and standing by their decisions. Or at least they tried to. The overwhelmingly negative reception they received from launch from the community probably shocked many at TrKz. Many, if not practically all, of the new flagship features they championed as innovation for Civ VII were viscerally rejected by many players. The unwavering passion with which many players opposed these changes prompted TrKz to listen to fan feedback on core features as far back as July, with the introduction of the continuity setting for age transitions in Update 1.2.3. Since, we have received numerous balance passes, the return of core map types, which honestly should have been in the game at launch, I mean Pangea, some UI tweaks, and even a water theme update to go with the Tides of Power collection. Now, in early 2026, a few months after the announcement of the feature workshop in late October 2025, we have received the first big ray of sunshine for the future of Civ VII, the previously referenced Test of Time update. This big, expansion-like drop is aimed at a spring 2026 release and promises to overhaul many of the game's contentious design choices like legacy paths, age-restricted civs, and victory conditions. As of the time of writing, the first week of February 2026, we are still short on details on how exactly the game will work after these major changes. But honestly, I will be there for them day one. They seem fantastic. Huge props to the development team in TrKz for putting in the work, and most importantly, for having the guts and integrity to backtrack on such foundational mechanics for the game based on our feedback. Before closing, I'd like to speculate a bit on the future of the game. As mentioned earlier, TrKz's internal timelines have certainly shifted significantly in past months. Whatever their original plans for 2026 were, it is safe to assume their detour towards changing core systems have changed them. With this in mind, and considering that the Test of Time update is now unlikely to be the first major instance of addressing player feedback on the already existing systems, when would TrKz move on from fixing and start building upon the game? When would they be ready to release the first expansion? Well, my not at all creditable estimation would be, at the very least, late 2027. As mentioned earlier, they took around a year to release each of the 6 expansions. More crucially, it seems to me like TrKz will dedicate all of 2026 to fixing the problems with the original release of Civ VII. Some work on improving systems like religions has already been teased and likely developed, which might decrease the workload of developers in the future. But this is only a speculation, don't at me. Whatever the future may hold for Civ VII, I will be there. Civilization is one of my favorite franchises of all time. The time I've spent in it has been some of the most rewarding and instructive of my gaming life. It has challenged me intellectually and mentally. From winning my first game in Prince difficulty, to trying and failing to keep afloat when challenging the deity AI, to now having earned a couple dozen deity wins in both Civ VI and Civ VII. Sid Meier's brainchild has given me hundreds of hours of joy. That is why I care. That is why I was so thrilled about and then so frustrated with Civ VII. This first year was rough. The game wasn't where it needed to be. But it is starting to get there, thanks to the endless passion of its developers and fans. Civilization VII will be great. I have no doubt about it. The bright future ahead is finally outshining the dark Year Zero that is finally coming to an end. And whenever dawn breaks on the new Civ VII, I will be there.